here. So welcome to today's EPIC conference session on healthy lifestyles and wellness. So I'm Andrew Sixsmith. I'm a professor of gerontology at Simon Fraser University. I am one of the co-founding directors of AgeWell and currently associate scientific director. I'm also the lead of the challenge area on healthy lifestyles and wellness for AgeWell. Currently, I'm working with some colleagues on a book for Springer, the publishers, who are going to publish a series of books on AgeWell's 8 challenge areas. So I would really recommend you to have a look at those when they're published. To start with, I'd like to introduce the speakers. We have Jonathan Lowe from the University of British Columbia, Harmehr Sekhon, McGill University, Brookelyn Koersen, University of British Columbia, and Elise Wiley, McMaster University, along with Jennifer Monahan, who is a stroke survivor. Before we start, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. My fellow panelists and I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are located on this unceded homeland of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Neutral peoples, whose histories, languages, and cultures influence our vibrant community. Okay, a few more things before we get going. So the EPIC conference is running for 10 days, and we have 3 days left. So please continue to watch our great sessions. The challenge area presentations will continue to take place on Crowdcast from 1 to 2:30 Eastern on Wednesday and Thursday this week. Our French partners are hosting a session on June the 9th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern. On Friday, June the 10th, our partner Myra is hosting the panel Bridging the Digital Divide, Equity in Aging, Health and Technology, followed by a Star Institute panel on Get Published, and I will be there again. And finally, the EPIC conference will be closing at the end of the week. I encourage you to check out our AgeWell EPIC conference webpage for additional details and registration information. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Today's session will be comprised of 4 presentations of about 10 minutes with a 5-minute Q&A following each one. And then we will conclude with general Q&As that aim to place the presentations in a larger discourse and addresses potential research impact. Attendees are encouraged to use the Ask a Question box to ask questions, leave a comment on a question, and upvote questions that others have submitted. Please be aware the session is being recorded and will be available for playback. Links to playback will be on Crowdcast and on the EPIC conference site. Okay, well, let's get going. I would like to turn things over to presenter number 1, who is Jonathan Lowe of the University of British Columbia. Jonathan completed his undergraduate degree in public health epidemiology at Brigham Young University in Utah and his master's degree at Memorial University in Newfoundland. Jonathan's current research focuses on the intersection of mobile health monitoring and the metabolic responses of various forms of exercise in those living with inflammatory chronic diseases. The overarching goal of Jonathan's work is to further the idea of using exercise as medicine for clinical populations. He is an avid triathlete. Great. Well, we can chat about that because I've done many of those as well. He enjoys fly fishing and hiking and is an accomplished pianist. He's a real Renaissance man. Most of his free time is spent doing these exact things and is with his beautiful wife and daughters. Okay, over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sixsmith. We'll definitely have to loop up at some point regarding the great sport of triathlon. As I begin sharing my screen here, we'll dive into the presentation for today. And for those of you who didn't have a chance to get to look before, as you can see, my presentation here is about the feasibility of a remote clinical trial in older adults living with type 2 diabetes. We've tabbed this the MOTIVATE T2D Trial. And it's a fairly relevant trial in today's world, especially in the remote nature of what we've tried to do with this trial so far. For those who are aware or who aren't aware, during COVID, in-person research was quite a challenge. And so the remote nature of this trial enabled it to continue forward. And hopefully today I'll be able to present some of our preliminary findings that might help convince other researchers or those of you who might participate in research to do so in a remote setting. I think it's important to understand that a lot of this research doesn't happen without fantastic funding bodies, and you can see here that I've been funded by AgeWell, as well. This project it comes from a cooperative grant from the MRC in the UK, as well as the CIHR here in Canada. Also important is the teamwork that goes into putting this research on, and so you can see a few of our team members of the broader MOTIVATE team that have contributed to this work and continue to contribute to this work. Now, to start off, I just want to kind of touch on what I alluded to previously, but throughout time, and if we think about our ancient ancestors and the way that they lived, there was a sentiment in our cave men and women ancestors that energy expenditure or movement was mostly limited to chasing food or to moving or finding food. And that was the idea, that there was movement throughout time, and people would move, but for specific purposes. If we fast forward to today's world and think about where we're at, especially in a post-COVID world, we generally don't move. Where sometimes maybe I shouldn't say that, it's a negative thought, but there's a lack of movement. There's an increased amount of sedentary behavior that we see throughout the population, and especially amongst older adults. And if you take a second just to think about in your own life, how have you engineered physical activity out of your life, if you have? And I would encourage you, as we talk about the idea of exercise and physical activity and how it can benefit your life, that you think about ways that you can maybe engineer physical activity back into your life. Because as we see, estimates indicate that about physical activity levels have dropped by about 50 to 60% even just during COVID. And so that's a decent amount. So instead of maybe skipping the dishes one night, I would encourage you to maybe get up and walk to that restaurant, or instead of talking to your Google Home to turn on the TV, maybe get up and grab the remote. Just small little things like that. So we tried to take aim at that with this MOTIVATE project, I guess focusing more on this research side of things. So we know that older adults, and specifically older adults with type 2 diabetes, are fairly sedentary. And we know that supervised exercise interventions, so that take aim at trying to help people become more active, are fairly effective to be able to try and get individuals to be more active. So that means by going into a gym and having a one-on-one session with a personal trainer. We know that that's not very feasible, especially throughout a large country like Canada, where there are many islands in the ocean. There's people that live very far up north, And a lot of people don't have access to, say, physical activity equipment, exercise equipment, or even resources for trainers and whatnot. And so we kind of took aim to see how we could implement this in a remote nature, where we wouldn't necessarily need to be face-to-face. And so that's what we undertook, or are undertaking, I guess, as part of this MOTIVATE trial. And so we wanted to see if it was feasible to do the way that we designed the trial, to implement it into the Canadian population, the older adult population living with type 2 diabetes, and to possibly implement it into a future randomized control trial, depending on what we find. So I'll hopefully be able to present some preliminary results to you so far today. So what were our objectives as we set out on this journey? Well, as I mentioned, just the idea of feasibility. We wanted to see, of the population that we got in contact with, how many were eligible, how many were willing to partake in such a trial. We really wanted to look at adherence rates and retention. So where there isn't that face-to-face contact of the individual coming into a laboratory or coming in for a training session, we wanted to see if individuals still were retained in such a trial. And then we also, with the remote nature of using the mail system and whatnot, and some of our other objectives and secondary outcomes, we wanted to see how that would work in terms of acceptability of our participants and whether they enjoyed it, the things we had them undergo. So as part of this, and kind of, you might think, well, Jonathan, how are you proposing to do this? And that would be a very good question that you'd be asking yourself. So we turned to technology, which we know can be a very fantastic thing, but can also be a very intimidating thing, especially in our older adult population. And so we turned to technology and tried to incorporate it into this trial. And so through online platforms and a watch that is able to guide individuals through a pre-programmed workout, an exercise specialist could interact with an individual from a remote distance. And we know that the research has shown that this might be able to increase adherence to physical activity programs. So to kind of replace that one-on-one in the gym contact for getting more active, but replacing that with technology. So fairly significant. So what did we do? How did we set out to do this? Well, we recruited 120 individuals. So this is a multi-site trial, actually. So there's a site in the UK that recruited 60 participants, and then we recruited 60 participants here in Canada. And as I mentioned, the intervention side of the trial, where individuals were randomized on a one-to-one basis, and they were randomized either to our intervention, they would receive the watch that would get those pre-programmed workouts and send information back and forth to the exercise specialist. So there was that ongoing communication. And then the active control group received a heart rate strap that would monitor their heart rate, but wouldn't give feedback to the exercise specialist, as well as would not give feedback to the participants. The participants, once they were enrolled, they completed health checks. So as I mentioned, we would mail them equipment in order to conduct health checks in their own home. And they would do that before they completed the 6-month exercise intervention. They would do it right after the 6-month intervention. And then there was a 6-month follow-up. And at 12 months, they would do a follow-up health check. And again, everything mailed to them. They would conduct the health check and mail blood samples and things like that back to us. There are also exercise consultations. So we kind of had a behavior element to this, where throughout the 6-month intervention, both groups, so the mHealth and the control group, would undergo and are undergoing 5 different exercise consultations that would take aim at assessing their adherence, making changes to the exercise routine as necessary, discussing progress, and having that contact with participants. There were also other elements. I should mention that we had feedback with text messages. There was also questionnaires that we sent out, really to try and grasp and gauge that acceptability from our participants, who are so vital to this research. So where are we now? As of right now, we finished recruitment. So unfortunately, if there's anybody out there that thinks, gosh, this is such a cool trial and Jonathan's so passionate about it, which I am. Unfortunately, we have closed recruitment, but hopefully eventually we would see this rolled out into a larger randomized control trial. But we had 132 individuals consent over the course of a year of recruiting. 8 were excluded based on our exclusion criteria after testing. We've had 124 of the 132 that have completed baseline testing. And our post-testing measures, as you can see here, aren't going to be the most accurate because that's the phase we're in currently of the trial. So we have had a few dropouts already, but there are a bunch that are ongoing. Now, in terms of the feasibility of this, so in terms of what have we received back, this gives us a good indication of our baseline measures, at least. So post measures and follow-up measures we don't have yet, but you can see our success rate is fairly high through so far. So what this basically tells us is that individuals who are enrolling in the study are having success doing this testing in their own homes and on their own, which is a really encouraging thing. Really encouraging to see the ability of blood samples to be mailed across Canada and to still get valid lipid and A1C levels. Encouraging to see some good wear time. So CGM stands for continuous glucose monitors. So individuals are able to wear those for at least 7 days, about 89%. And we see individuals as well having success with blood pressure and height and weight measurements, which we would definitely hope to see. But nonetheless, so far in the trial, we are encouraged with the remote nature and what we're seeing, especially with the older adult population. And there's definitely some hurdles and obstacles that we're working through in terms of trying to coach individuals through the technology piece, even with the continuous glucose monitors and whatnot. But nonetheless, encouraging results and showing that remote testing is a viable option so far, and hopefully we'll get more results as we continue through collecting data in this process. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your time, and I will take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me have a look at the question box. Jonathan, can you speak to the watch you used in the study? Was it just a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, or was it one you created for purpose?
That's a very fantastic question. Thank you very much. So I can speak to that. We went with the Polar watch, and for a few reasons, and I'm happy to discuss that at much length, but I'll be brief. So the Polar watch we chose mostly because of the platform, the existing platform that Polar has. So they have a what they call a coaching platform, and that enables the exercise specialist to design the workouts online and to send them to the watch, the Polar watch of the individual. Then when the individual completes the workout, the watch guides them through it. It then sends it back to the coach or the exercise specialist to do the analysis and be able to see that. And so that was one of the main reasons. The other reason we went with Polar is because they have the heart rate strap, which gave us the ability to have that active control group. So it still records their heart rate. We can still hopefully measure adherence, but not the individual wouldn't get necessarily that feedback that you would get. Ideally, someday it would be fantastic to move into the realm of creating something that's specific. There are some gimmicks that we see with the Polar platform. No platform is perfect so far. So if anybody is interested in working to create a platform with us, we would. Andrew?
Sorry, it froze there. I'm really sorry about that. I think we've got time for one more question. Jonathan, can you tell us more about your participant group? What is the age distribution? Is there diversity? Any differences in continued use adherence?
Hi, Andrew. I think Jonathan was just disconnected.
Okay.
So maybe we can save that for the final question and answer period and bring up our next presenter.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, sorry about that, Jonathan. We'll press on to the next presentation. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Harmehr Sekhon, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Lady Davis Institute, Jewish General Hospital, McGill, and McLean Hospital, Harvard. She has 28 peer-reviewed publications. Her research interest is in technological interventions, e.g. virtual reality, Zoom, humanoid robots, in older adults with mental health and cognitive issues. She is supported by a CIHR fellowship, MITAX fellowship, and Age Well Award. And she's calling in from somewhere exotic today, are you not?
Yes, I am, and I hope you can all hear me. I'm going to try to share screen. Please let me know if you're able to see my screen. Okay, it should be sharing my screen now. Are you able to see it?
Yes, we are.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. I'm really excited to be sharing with you today our work on virtual reality in older adults. To begin with, I'll just share my disclosures. I am currently supported by an HWell Technology Postdoctoral Award, as well as by a CIHR Fellowship and a MITAX Fellowship. And I'm affiliated with both McGill and the Jewish General Hospital, as well as with McLean Hospital, and these wonderful labs at both of these institutions here. So I'll begin with a really brief background, but I think what I would love for the focus of my presentation to be on today is really what can we do with technology to help support older adults who want to age successfully in the community and want to age in a healthy way and maintain a healthy lifestyle. So a little bit of brief background. As we know, both the Canadian and the global populations are rapidly aging. We have a larger proportion of older adults, and we also have a increasing number of individuals being affected by various things such as dementia, depression, other mental health conditions as well. And what we've seen with COVID is that due to the social isolation that we've all been experiencing, but especially vulnerable groups such as older adults have been experiencing, is that the impact on their mental health has especially been very concerning. So now we've got this compounded effect of a very large older adult population, an increasing burden on mental health stressors, social isolation, as well as on caregiver burden. And we need to be able to identify ways through which we can help support both the older adults as well as the caregivers within the community, as well as in various different settings. So that's where virtual reality comes in. Over the course of COVID-19 and previously as well, overall, we've been becoming more open to digital means of delivery, whether that's for healthcare or other services. And virtual reality is quickly gaining interest. And what we've seen is that typically virtual reality really has been explored more so for younger adults. It's been shown to be quite positive with various different things such as pain management, cognition, and mental health. But really with older adults, there's very limited data till date, and that's a gap that we would like to fill. Okay, so here's a brief case study that comes out of the lab at McLean, where clinically using virtual reality with the patient was found to be very beneficial. So this was a patient who had already received various sessions. They were psychotherapy sessions. However, they were kind of experiencing a block. And through virtual reality, which is extremely immersive, both audio wise in terms of the listening and sound, and also visually, because you're able to see in 360, they were really able to move past their block. So clinically, we know that virtual reality is quite promising, and it is feasible with older adults. I'm going to focus the bulk of my presentation now on our study and how we went about, first of all, designing our study, but more also what I find really interesting is the actual intervention and how we went about designing, creating, and developing this intervention. So what we wanted to focus on is virtual reality-based mindfulness meditation for older adults, specifically older adults experiencing stress. And this is, of course, currently still during COVID-19. And what we wanted to do is to pilot this in older adults, both in an in-home setting where they were actually from day one learning to use the VR independently, of course, with support through Zoom and other mediums, and also give them the opportunity, if they preferred, to do it in person. And it's been very exciting, and we've really had very positive responses thus far. The study is ongoing, and what it is, it's a 4-week, 8 sessions, so it's twice weekly for 15 minutes each session. The VR device that we're currently using is the Oculus Quest 2. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to assess first and foremost the feasibility and tolerability of VR, as well as its effect on stress, as well as other mental health outcomes. So I'd love to actually show you some of the content we've created. The reason we chose to go down the path of creating our own content is because we found the content already available to not very accessible and user-friendly, especially for individuals that are very new to VR. Oftentimes the content would have either lighting that was quite startling, or objects or images that were really moving in towards you, and other such things. So we wanted their first experience to be very inviting and accessible. And the other concern also with VR content on the market presently is that most of it is not the best quality in terms of the resolution and so forth, which is why we actually created our own VR content for the Mindfulness Meditation Intervention Program. So in total, we created 8 videos because the sessions were twice weekly for 4 weeks, so 8 sessions in total. And in order to be as accessible as possible, because we are based out of Montreal, we created them both in English and French. We would love to develop other languages, the videos in other languages, and to translate them as well. And we hope that will come sometime in the future. So I'm going to try to share screen and just show you a couple of the videos. These are just screenshot images from the 8 different videos, just to kind of give you an idea as to what we've captured. So we were really aiming to have a very nature-based, peaceful setting. And oftentimes we also had nature sounds in the background. All the videos are available for the older adults on YouTube. They're completely free of cost. They have no ads or anything else. They're approximately 15 minutes, sometimes a bit longer. We do have a progression in terms of numbering of the sessions, but of course, older adults are, it's very accessible to them. They're able to come back to us at any time. And what I'll also do is just quickly show you perhaps a few samples from the videos itself. So I have them loaded, so hopefully they're very good quality, but please let me know. So I'm going to meet this here, but just to kind of give you an idea. So imagine you're wearing the VR headset, which is essentially like a really heavy pair of goggles that you just slip on over your head. It has built-in volume control and sound, so they're actually able to hear. We have a script for the mindfulness meditation playing. And what they're also able to do, essentially, is just turn their head any which way, and they're able to actually look around. So it's really as if you're in the forest. So if I just do this, I can look up. Of course, in the actual headset, you would simply just turn your head instead of moving it with the cursor. But just to give you an idea of what they're able to see. In order to make this very safe and accessible for older adults, we've made it so that all sessions are done seated, especially because there's the option of doing it in-home as well as in person. And with the Oculus Quest 2, one of the safety features is that you actually have to set a boundary around you when you first put on the Oculus. And so what it allows is that it makes sure that if you move past the boundary, that you're able to actually see your real surrounding instead of what's playing on the device itself. That way, you know, if the older adult does move around, you know, there's no safety risk in terms of them falling or tripping. We want to, of course, be very mindful of that. So that's one video here. Very quickly, I'll just show you another. So what you'll see is that really you're able to look around. Oh, it's just buffering for a quick moment here. Perhaps I'll come back.
Idéalement assis sur une chaise.
So this one is in French here. And if you look above, you should be able to see the branches moving with the wind. So it's not the same as experience as if you were putting on the headset, but I hope this kind of gives you an idea of what the videos appear like. You're able to see the birds moving, the clouds, and so forth. And perhaps one last video here. I'm just going to mute this as well. This is just of a beautiful sunrise. Again, you know, able to see the clouds, the water, any of the shrubs and greenery moving as well. So with that, maybe I'm going to switch back to the screen here. So we made 8 videos of this sort, really very focused on nature. And as I had shared with you, this is a randomized control trial. So we're aiming for approximately 30 participants. We're very close to our recruitment goal. And we've actually completed the in-home component of the study. So this was older adults who opted to have the device mailed to them or sent to them, and then they were able to use this in an in-home setting, in which case they still met with the interventionist. It would simply be over Zoom. So you know, they would have the 15-minute session with their device on. Prior to even beginning the intervention, we had a 1-hour-long digital literacy session, really just to have them be, you know, more used to and just get to know the device. In addition to this session, we also sent home a pamphlet with all the steps and images of what the device would look like, what the turn-on screen would look like, where the buttons were, and so forth. And we're really excited because we found overall that the older adults did not have a single serious technical difficulty, which we consider, you know, them not being able to complete a session. There was a few small technical issues, but in every single case, we were able to resolve them, and they were able to complete the session. So that's very positive because these were older adults that had never experienced or used virtual reality devices previously, and they were able to do so successfully at home. So every single session over the 4 weeks, they meet with the interventionist, and then over Zoom typically. And then, of course, the assessments are pre and post for our study design here. And the 30 participants are split into, it's a simple randomization into a control group. So it's a waitlist control as well as the treatment group. And we hope to be able to share the results with you later this year or early next year. So some of the barriers that we, you know, it's very important to highlight the barriers and how we're able to consider them, and the ones that still remain and how we're going to actively work towards them. So with VR, you know, the main consideration is visual or hearing impairments. So that is something that is a limitation in terms of individuals who can be included. Digital literacy was a barrier, but we were able to successfully mitigate it using these different means. So having the pamphlet being sent to them, having the digital literacy session prior to, and then having an interventionist on Zoom with them, so that even if they, you know, did not have a caregiver or anyone who could come with them and join them to help them with any of these sessions, which was typically the case actually. These were older adults doing the sessions themselves. They were able to successfully navigate the technology component. And we hope to be able to, like I said earlier, to have this in more languages outside of English and French soon. So in terms of the future of VR, I know that, you know, when we talk about the Oculus, this is a device that is more costly. It's about $400 or $500, but it is something that can easily be scaled. There are more affordable options of VR. There's devices that start as low as $10 or $15, and they simply allow you to slide your cell phone into these glasses, and then that simply creates a version of the VR device using your phone. So then you could go onto YouTube or other platforms, select 360 content, and view it yourself. And it can be implemented in different settings, which is a huge plus for VR. And it's a technology that we're very excited about, and we're looking forward to creating other interventions and really working with older adults as we create these interventions to make sure that we're incorporating their feedback at every stage. I guess with that, I'll say thank you. This is my email. I'm gonna, I know we have a short question and answer session now and one at the end. I'm gonna stay on, but this is my email as well. Always happy to speak more about it, or if anyone's interested to learn more. And a huge thank you again.
Thank you, Harmehr. We've got time for a couple of questions, I think. Firstly, have your participants provided any feedback on the Oculus headset and its comfort, discomfort during these sessions?
That's a wonderful question. So yes, we have received some feedback for the Oculus. So the Oculus is quite heavy. That's one feedback and important consideration. With VR, it's a sphere that's moving very, very rapidly. So I see that very soon it's going to be extremely likely that we will have much more advanced technologies that are more comfortable, lightweight, and more affordable. So, but that is a very important consideration, and that was some feedback that we had received.
Okay, one more question, I think. Have you worked with older adult or caregiver stakeholders as co-researchers in your research so far? If not, what are your plans for future engagement?
That's a wonderful question. So actually, before we piloted the intervention, after we had, so we were working with different community stakeholders, because our laboratory also works with a very large number of community programs for older adults and organizations. But actually, once they were, we had even created the all the interventions, we had some older adults try them out and give us feedback before we even went ahead with the pilot. So it's very important to us, and we've been ensuring that we really value their feedback and include it at every stage.
Thank you, Harmehr. There was one more comment, is that somebody wanted you to share the links to the videos. So if you could do that, we really appreciate it. If there's any, oh, sorry, I think I might have been muted there. I was just saying I'm happy to do that. And if there's any issues with accessing them, there shouldn't be. Just feel free to reach out at any time. I'm happy to help troubleshoot that as well. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Harmehr. Let's go on to the next presentation. Okay, so our third speaker today is Brookelyn Koersen from the University of British Columbia. Brookelyn graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Psychology from UBC Okanagan in May 2021, and has been working as a research assistant on the age-well-funded project Indigenous Methodologies for Telediabetes and Obesity Care in Urban Indigenous Communities. I'm getting terrible feedback on this, so I'm stumbling over some of these things. And that's with Dr. Charlotte Jones and Dr. Donna Kurtz over that time. Brookelyn is passionate about improving healthcare for underserved communities, and plans to pursue such work throughout her career. Okay, over to you, Brookelyn.
Are you unable to mute yourself? Okay, so we have some connection issues. Okay, here we go.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll just share my screen here. Sorry about that. So thank you so much for the introduction, Dr. Sixsmith, as well as to the organizers of this conference. Before I begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Syilx Nation, as well as the Secwepemc, St'át'imc, and Chilcotin nations upon which this work is taking place. I'd also like to acknowledge the Métis and Friendship Center communities located in Kamloops, Kelowna, Lillooet, and Williams Lake, British Columbia, all of which have made this work possible. My name is Brookelyn. I'm a third-generation settler with Dutch, English, and Scottish heritage, and I'm joining today from the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, Tsuut'ina First Nation, Stoney Nakoda, and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. I'm grateful to be here today sharing the beginnings of a two-eyed seeing integrative review focused on honoring traditional healers in Indigenous-led health service partnerships. So this review is being done in the context of the AgeWell-funded project, Indigenous Methodologies for Telediabetes and Obesity Care in Urban Indigenous Communities, or what we call I'm to Care. The goal of I'm to Care is to co-develop, implement, and evaluate an Indigenous-led, culturally safe, and multidisciplinary telediabetes and weight management service for urban, older Indigenous adults. Most importantly, we aim to do this research in a good way, using Indigenous methodologies and participatory action research approaches. Everything in I'm to Care is done at the direction of Indigenous community partners. This includes traditional healers, knowledge keepers, elders, friendship and Métis centers, and community members, alongside interior healthcare providers and UBC researchers, and all of these different stakeholders are equal partners in this work. So, by way of context, in 2015 and 2016, Dr. Tana Kurtz and Dr. Charlotte Jones partnered with 3 friendship centers in the interior of British Columbia and created a vision for Indigenous health, which you can see there on the slide. And this vision formed the basis of the I'm to Care project, and an important aspect was the involvement of traditional healing in telediabetes and obesity clinics. Historical and contemporary colonialism have produced barriers to accessing traditional healing and practices, despite significant demand for such service by Indigenous peoples and a growing evidence base, including Indigenous ways of knowing as well as Western research, that shows traditional approaches to health and healing improve access to care and holistic wellness for Indigenous peoples. There's a knowledge and health equity gap concerning the question: how should Indigenous traditional healers be part of wellness teams alongside Western trained physicians, nurses, and other healthcare providers? Therefore, the aims of this literature review are to explore existing studies, projects, and programs related to traditional healers' involvement in the delivery of Indigenous healthcare, and to identify contextual differences, for example, policy, between communities and countries that influence this involvement. Most importantly, though, we aim to honor Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing and being. As such, this integrative review uses a two-eyed seeing approach. Two-eyed seeing was described by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall, and it brings together and acknowledges the strengths of both Indigenous and Western ways of knowing. The team conducting this literature review consists of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous researchers and trainees as equal partners and decision makers. We've chosen an integrative review methodology, which was outlined by Whitmore and Naffel in 2005, because it allows for the inclusion of a broad array of experimental and non-experimental primary sources in order to more fully understand a phenomenon of interest. This is important in terms of two-eyed seeing, as evaluations or descriptions of Indigenous-led healthcare services may not be published in peer-reviewed literature for a variety of reasons, or take a more relational, qualitative approach that other Western review methods are not able to fully appreciate. The search strategy for the review was co-developed by Indigenous and non-Indigenous members of the research team with the guidance of a librarian. We determined the 4 concept areas of the search to be traditional healers or elders, medicine men, medicine women, a healthcare setting such as a primary health clinic or telehealth, Indigenous peoples, and the countries of Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. We chose to limit our search to these countries as they share a similar colonial history. No limits were placed on the time of publication or the type of research conducted in order to find as much relevant literature as possible. We decided to exclude literature that focused on healthcare services outside of Canada, US, Australia, and New Zealand, literature that focuses on traditional healers other than those who are Indigenous to those 4 countries, and literature that focuses on the involvement of traditional medicine practices in general, rather than the involvement of traditional healers specifically. We began by developing and conducting a search in OVID Medline, which was then adapted to CINAHL and Web of Science. Our next steps will be to conduct a targeted search of the Indigenous Studies Portal, or iPortal, from the University of Saskatchewan, reviewing the references of included articles, and hand-searching Indigenous-specific journals, as well as a list of government and Indigenous organization websites for gray literature. So far, as I mentioned, we've conducted database searches in Medline, CINAHL, and Web of Science, and this resulted in 571 potential sources after duplicates were removed. The title and abstract of each of these sources was screened by 1 review team member based on our co-developed inclusion and exclusion criteria. Of those, 93 articles went on to full-text screening, which is currently in progress. During the full-text screening, both an Indigenous and a non-Indigenous team member will screen each full-text article to ensure a 2-eyed seeing approach is being maintained. Currently, we're approximately 2/3 of the way through full-text screening, and at this point, 10 articles have been included in the review. Once full-text screening is completed, the team will review each source for information surrounding how traditional healers are involved in healthcare delivery and the specifics of that involvement, author positionality, and whether Indigenous partners are included as authors on the work, the definitions of both traditional healing and traditional healers, as this varies between Indigenous communities and cultures, barriers and facilitators for involving traditional healers in Indigenous health services, any important contextual factors where the health service is located, such as policies surrounding funding for traditional healers, and finally, any recommendations for policy, future research, and practice. We hope that this integrative review on honoring traditional healers in Indigenous-led healthcare partnerships will first and foremost advocate for and support Indigenous community member access to traditional healers, contribute to the promotion of traditional and Western Indigenous-led health service partnerships by summarizing what's currently known about the inclusion of traditional healers in such services, and to inform this process in the ongoing I'm to Care project. Of note, so far we have not come across any information on the inclusion of traditional healers in telehealth services, such as those offered through I'm to Care, so the healers and community members we have partnered with may guide us in this new direction. So thank you so much for having me here today. I'd also like to thank all the community partners and team members, Dr. Jones, Dr. Kurtz, as well as Interior Health Authority, who've made this work possible. Also, thank you to AgeWell for organizing this conference and for generously funding the I'm to Care project. I am able to take questions now.
Thank you, Brookelyn. That was excellent. Let me just scroll down. There's a couple of questions here that I think we've got time to go through. So, Brookelyn, can you speak to some of your findings thus far? Do you see Indigenous healing and healers involved in health services? I think you might have touched on that, but if you want to just carry on a little.
Yeah, so far we haven't found too many relevant articles that kind of discuss the involvement of traditional healers in healthcare. However, what we have seen is traditional healers kind of being within a primary care clinic alongside physicians and nurses, and having a lot of open dialogue between the Western trained health providers and the traditional practitioners. Yeah, in terms of I'm to Care, I think we're hoping to have a traditional healer join the session virtually and do a group session for participants. And we've decided that based on feedback from the communities, but we wanted to do this literature review just to see how other projects similar to ours have done this.
Thank you. Brookelyn, can you speak to how Indigenous patients currently access Indigenous healing practices in the communities involved in your project?
Yeah, for sure. So within Indigenous communities, participants, there is no formal way, I guess, of accessing a traditional healer or traditional services as you would access a doctor or a nurse. So traditional healers are really accessed through community networks, and I guess more by word of mouth.
Okay. 1 second. Can you tell us about the involvement of the traditional healers?
Yeah. So far, the involvement of traditional healers within I'm to Care, the project.
The question was as I read it. So
okay.
However you interpret that.
It sounds good. Yeah. So far we have partnered with 2 traditional healers from Kelowna, and they will be conducting a virtual session with I'm to Care participants, a group session, probably sometime in the fall or winter. And these traditional healers were suggested by community members as trusted healers within their communities. And in addition to that, the traditional healers will also be hosting a session for the Western trained healthcare providers involved in I'm to Care, so physicians, dietitians, and nurses, to, I guess, kind of build relationships and an opportunity for co-learning in terms of how the traditional medicines and practices that they use with participants can go hand in hand with the more Western approaches to treating diabetes or weight management concerns.
Okay. Thank you, Brookelyn.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll go on to the next speaker. So our 4th and final speaker today is Elise Wiley from McMaster University, and Jennifer Monahan, who is a stroke survivor. I'll just introduce people. So Jennifer, having a stroke and heart disease has not defined Jennifer Monahan, but rather given her the experience and passion to become an active volunteer and advocate. A lawyer by training, she served on the Heart and Stroke Foundation's Mission Council on Vascular Cognitive Impairment, the British Heart Foundation's Big Beat Challenge Research Award, and numerous other volunteer endeavors. She was only 43 when, without any risk factors, her stroke and ultimate rediscovery of cardiomyopathy happened, so she feels particularly invested in supporting healthcare and research on the heart and the brain. Welcome, Jennifer. Elise Wiley completed her Bachelor's of Science in Exercise Physiology at the University of Miami and a Master's of Science at McMaster University under the supervision of Dr. Ada Tang. She's developed a strong interest in sex and gender considerations, where her current PhD research focused on the intersection between sex and gender considerations and telerehabilitation of individuals with stroke. Okay, over to Jennifer and Elise.
Perfect. I just want to make sure you can see my screen. Good?
Yes, looks great. Perfect.
Okay, so thank you so much for that introduction. I guess we'll jump right into it. I'm Elise Wiley. I'm a PhD student at McMaster University in the School of Rehabilitation Science. And I'm joined by my colleague, Jennifer Monahan.
Thanks. I live in Kelowna, BC, and I have had a stroke about 10 years ago.
All right. So with 80 million individuals living with stroke globally, acute and long-term support systems are paramount for recovery. However, individuals with stroke are commonly discharged back into the community with limited access to rehabilitation, as well as unmet rehabilitation needs that commonly include the need to improve mobility, balance, as well as lower extremity strength. The implementation of telerehabilitation interventions has increased, particularly in light due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and may be an effective and accepted means for delivering stroke rehabilitation. With previous qualitative studies reporting improvements in motor and limb function, as well as psychosocial benefits related to improved false confidence and quality of life and enjoyment. And although less understood, there are other potential benefits that include limited need for caregiving and transportation, as well as potential for reduced healthcare resource utilization. Now, it is important to consider the contributions of sex and gender as they may be associated with the effectiveness of telerehabilitation after stroke. So in terms of physiological considerations, we know that females experience greater losses of muscle mass after stroke, which can contribute to greater declines in functional abilities. Additionally, females experience stroke at older age, which can exacerbate some of these declines that we observe in both physiological and psychosocial factors. Another consideration is that females, even before stroke, tend to have a greater number of comorbidities, and this can also contribute to some more, to greater functional deficits. In terms of gender-based barriers, we know that women experience greater difficulties accessing rehabilitation due to having a greater number of caregiving and housework responsibilities, as well as a lack of transportation and time, limited self-autonomy on deciding whether or not to participate in stroke rehabilitation, as well as having lower exercise self-efficacy and external support from others. And I'll pass the torch over now to Jennifer, who will speak on her lived experience as well as her work as an advocate.
Thanks, Elise. So after my stroke, rehabilitation was my sole focus in life. I desperately wanted to regain the ability to speak and to use my right side. My mom was able to move in with us and take over all of my usual roles in the family and drive me for the first 2 months. And fortunately, we were able to afford all of my private physiotherapy, speech therapy, and not very many female survivors are able to do those things. But my rehabilitation was weakened by the fact that my healthcare team was relying on research that was only using male participants. How could I trust their management of my health when all the clinical research focused on men? And there were no gender-specific supports, information, or resources available throughout my healthcare. After my stroke, I created my, quote, new normal by becoming an active volunteer for heart and stroke-related efforts. And I believe that research must address the differences between men and women and not merely treat women as small men.
Thank you so much for that, Jennifer. So So it is clearly evident that women and females are disproportionately impacted in terms of stroke recovery, and therefore there's an urgent need to really understand how we can optimize their participation, as well as improve some of their functional deficits that they might experience after stroke. Therefore, our proposed study objective is to examine the sex and gender-based differences in the effectiveness and feasibility of an exercise-based telerehabilitation program called TRAIL among older adults less than 12 months after stroke in Canada. So in terms of our study design, our study involves 2 4-week telerehabilitation programs, and I'll touch on both of these briefly. The first, on the left-hand side of the screen, we have TRAIL, which stands for Telerehabilitation with Aims to Improve Lower Extremity Recovery Post-Stroke, and is a 4-week progressive intensity therapist-led exercise program that is focused on lower extremity recovery. We also have the education program, and although it is seen as the control group, we hope that we are able to teach our participants important self-management for stroke risk factors, as well as managing some of the challenges that they might live with after their stroke. The duration of each telerehabilitation session for both programs will be 60 to 90 minutes, and then the participants will engage in 2 telerehabilitation sessions per week, as well as engage in at least 1 self-management exercise session if they are enrolled in the TRAIL study or the TRAIL arm, or complete 1 additional homework session if they are involved in the education arm. Important eligibility criteria is that participants will have to be above the age of 19 years of age, as well as less than 12 months post-stroke and not currently involved with in or outpatient rehabilitation. Another important consideration is that this is a multi-site study, so it's conducted across 6 sites in Canada that are all involved with the CanStroke recovery platform. In terms of our outcome measures and analyses, we will aim to enroll 96 participants over 3 years, and we'll aim to have an equal proportion of males and females in the study. For our sex-based outcomes, our primary outcome will be the TUG, which provides an indication of mobility. And our secondary clinical outcomes will include assessments of balance, functional strength, motor impairment, as well as health resource utilization. In terms of our analysis plan, we aim to conduct mixed model analyses where we'll look at a 3-way interaction between sex, group, and time to determine whether or not there's any differences between males and females and their trajectories in functional outcomes over time, and if they differ between the TRAIL and education groups. For our gender-based outcomes, our primary outcome is the Genesis Praxis Questionnaire, which is a holistic assessment of gender. It provides an understanding of all 4 constructs of gender, which include gender roles, gender identity, institutionalized gender, and gender relations. And from here, we're able to calculate a composite score, which is then broken into 3 tertiles to really understand if an individual has masculine versus neutral versus feminine gender roles, where greater scores are associated with having feminine gender roles or gender characteristics, sorry. In terms of our, and we'll also look at feasibility indicators in terms of whether or not there are gender differences in retention rate, treatment fidelity, so whether or not men and women participate in the similar amount of TRAIL or education sessions. We'll look at adverse events. We'll also look at psychosocial outcomes because we know that women with stroke tend to experience greater depression and lower quality of life after stroke. So we'll include an assessment of the EQ 5D5L, as well as activity-specific balance confidence, which will provide an assessment of their self-efficacy to maintain balance in certain scenarios. For analysis, we'll look at descriptive statistics for each gender characteristic group, but for each of these feasibility indicators, and the criteria for success will be 85% or greater. Just to briefly go over the study timeline, so participants will undergo baseline assessment at T0, which will be conducted by an assessor who is not involved with the delivery of TRAIL or education. They'll then be randomized to either the 2 telerehabilitation groups, which will each last 4 weeks in duration. Then they'll undergo their T1 assessment after their 4 weeks, and then we'll calculate, or we'll look into the specific feasibility indicators for each participant between T0 and T1. And to really determine whether or not the functional, if there's any gains in functional capacity or functional outcomes that we observe, we'll also perform 2 follow-up visits at 3 and 6 months. And then our overall take-home message is that virtual rehabilitation may help individuals with different sex and genders recover after stroke, and I'll let Jennifer explain why.
Thank you. I believe that this trail study is an important step forward in improving rehabilitation across Canada, and particularly rehabilitation for women recovering from a stroke. Stroke survivors from rural and remote areas will be able to get rehab virtually when none was available before. I would have definitely taken advantage of virtual rehab when I had my stroke. It might have eliminated the need for a caregiver to drive me to and from the hospital after discharge, and I could have worked it in around my children's schedule. I felt completely lost and on my own after I was released from the hospital, and having telerehabilitation would have been an incredibly valuable resource and activity for me to look forward to and benefit from. I encourage you to share this opportunity to participate in TRAIL with all your stroke survivors who might be interested. Women in particular need to step up and participate in research.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And that concludes our presentation, and we're welcoming any questions.
Thank you very much, Jennifer and Elise. Let's scroll down. Okay, Elise, can you tell us more about the assumptions underlying the gender-based analysis? What defines a masculine versus feminine role?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So through this Genesis Praxis questionnaire, we'll really get a sense. Sorry, I should have said characteristic versus role. I think that's the first mistake on my end there. But what really defines a masculine characteristic is made up of factors that include gender role factors, which include that men tend to have higher income, they tend to have greater education in terms of the population of interest. But there's also other considerations that would make up a masculine characteristic. So women tend to have more stress. So less stress would be associated with a masculine characteristic. There's also a notion of men having higher power of authority when it comes to work settings. So that would be more in line with a masculine characteristic. And there's the Genesis Praxis also allows us to look in gender identity through looking into different gender traits, where there's traits that are specifically applicable to men versus women, and that kind of constitutes how we come up with the overall gender score.
Okay, thank you. Elise, are you currently... Oh, that disappeared. Elise, what are your expected outcomes of your study?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In terms of hypotheses, we do, just because of the sex and gender-based differences that we know of, so we know that females tend to experience greater disability after stroke. We might see that men tend to do better, in terms of having greater scores at each time point, but the magnitude of change might be greater in females because they might start at a lower baseline level, but through TRAIL or even the education program, we might see greater increases in magnitude of change in our female and women participants. And in terms of our gender-based factors, there can be two outcomes. Either we find that TRAIL is quite feasible for both men and women, which is great, and we continue to implement this further into clinical practice, or we see that women, the feasibility indicators aren't as successful in women, so we are below that 85% threshold, and we might have to revise and adapt the program to ensure that we do have a feasible and acceptable program for women in particular.
I think we've got time for one more question. Are you currently recruiting for the study? If yes, how can someone participate?
Yes, absolutely. We are absolutely full on recruitment mode for the study. Although this is a proposal, we are full swing in data collection. So as I mentioned, this study involves essentially 6 different sites in Canada, and each site has its own site coordinator who is involved with who's in charge of recruitment essentially. But we do have a TRAIL email that I can actually circulate out if anyone is interested or would like to circulate that out, because we are definitely in recruitment mode for sure.
Okay, thank you, Elise and Jennifer. So we're going to have a a wider question and answer session right now. So I think all the presenters are going to come up on screen right now. Please, in the audience, if you could add to the ask the questions list, and I can go through those. I'll take them one by one and try and go around the different presentations. Jennifer, question for you. Can you speak to the value of working with researchers on projects such as this?
Yes, thanks for that question. It's very important for people like me living with the disease at issue to be involved in the research, so that that ensures that the results relate and are relevant to patients. I have been attempting to participate in research for years, and this opportunity is excellent for me because I get the chance to help other stroke survivors get educated, and that'll benefit them. It benefits me personally because it gives me a sense of fulfillment. It was a terrible thing, the health issues that I've had, but turning it into something positive by volunteering or working with a researcher is a great opportunity also.
That's a really great thing. And as everybody knows, AgeWell is very, very keen to involve stakeholders, older adults, caregivers in the research in a meaningful way. So it's great that you were part of the presentation, Jennifer. Question for Jonathan. Can you tell us more about your participant group? What is the age distribution? Is there diversity? Curious about any differences in continued use and adherence.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that question. I unfortunately in my slides did not have the inclusion exclusion criteria, but they were individuals with newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes. So within the past 6 to 24 months at the time of enrollment, they were between the ages of 40 and older, and there was medication inclusion exclusion criteria. In terms of diversity, we had about 61% of our participants identified as Caucasian or white, and then the remaining 39% identified as other ethnicities. So all the way from African American to Southeast Asian, and quite a diverse population, I would say. And I guess to add to that,
sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, location-wise, the other thing that we are able to boast is we have recruited participants from almost every province in Canada. So all the way from far off Conch, Newfoundland, the Northern Peninsula, Newfoundland, all the way over to Victoria on the island, and everywhere in between. So that's been a really cool thing for us who get to interact with the participants, to go all over the world and all over the country in our Zoom meetings.
Thanks, Jonathan. A question for Brookelyn. Could you tell us more about the wider project and impact thus far in getting Western health providers to integrate Indigenous healing practices?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So I'm2Care has partnered with 5 Friendship and Métis centers in the interior British Columbia, a Friendship and a Métis center in Kelowna, Lillooet, Williams Lake, and Kamloops. And we've also partnered with a diabetes education center in Kelowna and Kamloops. So we have a community research liaison or a community research assistant who has relationships with community members, and they kind of go through the intake surveys, referral forms to the diabetes center and get that all set up. And then participants are able to see diabetes educators, nurses, and dietitians, and an Indigenous physician with special training in diabetes and weight management. In terms of integrating traditional healing, within the I'm to Care project with the Western healthcare providers, we're more focused on providing culturally safe care to participants rather than having Western providers practice traditional healing methods, as those take a lifetime to learn. And then that is why we're bringing in the traditional healers to kind of have them provide the traditional methods alongside the Western methods that doctors, nurses, dietitians offer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Question for Elise. Can you explain the rehabilitation sessions? Are the sessions one-to-one between one patient and a clinician? Do you use Zoom or MS Teams for the sessions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So ideally, it'd be delivered in a group format, because we know that group formats promotes external support and positive engagement. So the ideal would be 2-to-1, so 2 participants to 1 therapist for each trail and education. In terms of the platform that we'll be using, so this is highly dependent on what is approved at the institution. So, for example, we have University Health Network involved in Toronto. In their institution, they use MS Teams, which is broadly used across different platforms, but it'll be either Zoom or Teams depending on the institution.
Thank you very much. We've still got about 10 minutes, so a couple of questions for Jonathan here. Can you tell us more about the team involved in the project? It sounds like you have exercise and nutrition clinicians, psychologists as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great question. I should have, in my slides, I had a nice picture of everybody in the team. So we do have quite a transdisciplinary team. So we've got psychologists on the team, exercise psychologists, certainly exercise physiologists. There's economists, a health economist on the team. There's a few doctors on the team. Dr. Charlotte Jones is on our team. And I'm trying to think if we have anybody else, but quite an interdisciplinary team from Lancaster University, Exeter University, Liverpool, and then here at UBC.
Thanks, Jonathan. And one last question for you. Can you please explain more about the reasons for dropout? Why did the participants drop out of the study?
Yeah, so this actually relates to the presentation that was given right after mine. So we found that so far of our 7 that had dropped out, 5 dropped out for personal health reasons, and some identified mental health as being one of the reasons to drop out. We had 1 that was excluded after baseline testing due to abnormally high blood pressure that was contraindication to exercise, and then another individual who was non-compliant, so just ended up not responding to us, and so we weren't able to maintain contact with that person.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, I've got a great question here, which is for everybody. So we can go around the group. Could everybody speak about the next steps in your careers and what your hopes are for future work? Why don't we start with Brookelyn?
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, so I am going to continue working on this project for the next year. And in terms of my broader career goals, I have become very passionate about providing care to underserved communities. I grew up in a rural area, so I'm hoping to do that through both practicing healthcare as well as further research. Thank you.
Thanks, Brookelyn. Elise, what are your plans?
Well, I have about 2 years left of my PhD, and those 2 years will be spent on this trail study. But moving forward, beyond that, I hope to continue on with this line of sex and gender work in clinical populations, specifically stroke, because as Jennifer really shared, is that it's so important that we continue to prioritize women and how their recovery and trials, and we're only just starting to touch that surface, especially when it comes to gender-based considerations. So hopefully continuing on with this line of research. I do see a question in the chat about actually defining and measuring engagement. So this will be through our feasibility indicators related to treatment fidelity. So both education and trial have eight sessions, and we'll look at whether or not they attended all 8, and that will determine if we reach that feasibility criteria for engagement and exercise. And then we'll also look at retention rate through follow-up data, whether or not participants have all that data. But that'll be our measure of looking at engagement in our telerehabilitation programs.
Thank you, Elise. Jennifer, so I'd really like to hear your ideas about continuing to participate in the research process.
I'm open to all offers, always. I treat my volunteering and advocacy efforts as a part-time job, and I love doing them. And, it was incredible, the fact that having my stroke and heart disease, I lived with that for 10 years, and then I was able to join an international panel and go visit London, England in order to volunteer. Nobody ever said that that was in my future at all. And it was quite surreal to be sitting at the table as a volunteer with people like the chief scientific officers of various international communities, as well as people like the head of Google Health. And my voice was given the same value as his was when we were selecting and judging. And locally, I still enjoy, yesterday I went on the Heart and Strokes bike ride for health, and I cycled 8 kilometers to help raise funds. So the opportunities are out there, and I encourage stroke survivors to participate in the variety of opportunities that are out there. I think one of the issues will be ensuring that stroke survivors know about these opportunities. And we're beginning to develop Facebook pages and trying to reach out to engage people with lived experience. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jonathan, do you want to give us some ideas about what your plans are for the future? And you can tell me also about what your plans are as a triathlete as well.
I certainly will. I think that one of the most fulfilling things for me in this trial so far has been that interaction with the participants, and in terms of being able to see those small changes that they're able to maintain and bring about in their lives that yield great results for them. So to hear reports back of lower A1C levels and things like that is probably one of the most fulfilling things for me. So I think career-wise, I hope to continue in a career that enables me to continue to do this. I really loved the idea of a broader trial and that long-term getting to know participants. And so whether that's hopefully in the research realm of an academic or professor or an industry entrepreneurial role, hopefully being able to continue in the idea of promoting human movement. In terms of triathletes, gosh, I hope to just keep paring down on my my Olympic triathlon time.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much. I think we'll wind up the session there. One thing that struck me is that all the projects that were presented today are at quite an early stage. maybe we need to reconvene this group in the future, so you can tell us more about the actual results of your studies. That I think that would be a fascinating thing to do. So thank you very much for a wonderful session today, and thank you for your attendance. And please, for everybody in the audience, please sign up for our new our free events that are still going on in the EPIC conference. Okay, thank you very much to everybody.